Hi, I'm Tim Gillingham, your host for Gold Tips Aero University. Today, the lesson that we're going to cover is how to use the Gold Tips selection chart to make sure that you're getting the right arrow for your bow. The first thing you should understand about the selection chart is there's several criteria you need to understand. Very important that you read this information to the right of the chart. Now, if you're on the website on Gold Tips Aero University, there'll be a little tab above this particular chart here that you can click on, and it'll give you this information. Okay, what this information simply tells you is that you need to take into consideration what type of bow you're shooting. If you're shooting a bow that's 20 years old and has an IBO speed rating of 290 feet per second, you're probably going to use the information here, okay? Keep in mind, this tells us that this chart is formatted based off of an IBO speed rating of 315 feet per second, okay? If we're using a bow that has a higher IBO speed rating, now this is what the manufacturer recommends, or what the manufacturer, advertises their bow as. So if it's a PSE X-Force and it's 345 feet per second, manufacturer's IBO speed rating, then we need to pay attention here. And what it tells us simply is if you go stiffer than the 315 feet per second, you need to move a square stiffer on the chart. Just keep in mind, as it says right here,
when you go faster, use a stiffer shaft.
Another thing that you need to take into consideration is what type of a broadhead you're shooting, okay? Very important. If I'm shooting a very short broadhead here that it mimics the length of my field point, then I probably use the chart as is. If I'm using a longer broadhead like this NAP Killzone, it's about 1.5 inches long, I want to factor that extra inch of length into the tune chart. So make sure you take that into consideration. So let's go over here to step number 1. Find your draw weight on the chart, okay? You need to find your draw weight with a bow scale. All your pro shops should have that. Make sure you have the accurate draw weight. So for example, we come down the left side of the chart here, and we come to 70 to 74 pounds. If your bow falls in that 70 to 74 pound rate, this is the line that you're going to use on the chart. Step number 2, determine the length of your arrow by measuring from the throat of the nock. Now that's where the nock and the string meet, okay, to the end of the arrow. Okay, the end of the arrow is typically, the end of the actual insert. But keep in mind, like we talked about before, if you're adding another inch on top of a normal field point with a broadhead, you need to add another inch to your total arrow length. Always fudge to the stiff side, okay? So let's say, for example, we're using a 70-pound bow and a 29-inch arrow. So we come down here 70 pounds, we find the 29 slot, we run down here. This tells us we need to be in a zone 5 arrow. So we drop down here to zone 5, and that says we need a 300 spine arrow. Now we can go through the Gold Tip charts and the website and find an arrow in a 300 spine, whether it's a Pro Hunter, a Kinetic, maybe we want to shoot a 300 spine 22 series out of our hunting bow. Very acceptable. Now keep in mind, it also says, in this first paragraph that you really can't get too stiff. And I firmly believe the fact that you really can't get too stiff as long as you're using a compound bow with a release, okay? So if you want to shoot a 250 spined arrow or a 200 spined arrow or even a 150 spined arrow, you're fine. It may take a little bit more point weight to get optimal forgiveness out of it. Maybe you need to run a little bit more vane, but it is an acceptable thing to do. What you don't want to do is go weaker. Weaker is going to give you an arrow shaft that will not react consistent to each other, and you will not get as good a grouping as you do if you get stiff enough. Okay, let's go to the compound bow with a finger release. Now when we have a finger release, we're letting go with our fingers. The string has got to clear our fingers. Therefore, you're going to put a lot more oscillation into the string. You're going to require an arrow that needs to bend a little bit around those mistakes that you're making and kind of band-aid that poor nock travel that you're creating. So in order to do that, the best thing that we've determined is simply to use the compound bow chart, use the same specifications, use the same IBO speed rating on your bow, but move 2 squares to the weaker side. Okay, so for example, if we have a 70-pound, 29-inch arrow, we're just going to move 2 squares to the weaker side. That's going to put us right in the middle of a zone 4, which is a 340 spine. Now, the best thing to do as a finger shooter is to bare shaft tune your bow, and there'll be another session here in a preceding video that's going to show you how to do that. But bare shaft tuning should be your primary method of tuning. But if you'll take this 340 spine arrow, and you can use a 75-95 in a Pro Hunter, you can use a 340 Velocity. There's other options in the line, but that's primarily what you're going to be using, okay? So what you want to do is you want to start with that arrow about an inch longer than you normally would want it. That should make the arrow weak for you when you go to your bare shaft tuning. The best way to tune a compound bow with fingers is to simply trim the arrow length a 1/4 inch at a time until you get an acceptable tune. Once you get close, then you can use the FACT weight system to fine tune that if you really want to get it precise. You have cushion plunger adjustments on your bow, along with slight poundage adjustments that can really fine tune that arrow to the bow. In fact, one of the very best ways that you can really fine tune is just 1/4 turns on your bow limbs at a time. That should help the compound bow with finger shooters help understand how to select the chart. Basically, you're moving 2 squares weaker than you would with a compound and a release. Okay guys, this is pretty simple, pretty straightforward. The charts have been made to use to help you really truly understand which arrow you need to get for your bow. Now, keep in mind this information on the right side of the chart and below the chart here is on the website. There's usually a tab in Arrow University above the chart that you can click on. If you're on Build Your Own Arrow, there should be a tab in there where you can also click on and get this information. The catalogs all have this information in it. They also have bare shaft tuning guides. They also have paper tuning guides. We'll cover another lesson on how to do that more precisely as far as paper tuning and bare shaft tuning. But as far as using the selection chart to get the right arrow to start with, we should have covered it quite well for you, and you shouldn't have any problems. If you do have any problems going forward and you can't understand something, feel free to call Gold Tips customer service, and we can help you out there also.